Kelly, are we ready?
We are ready, Patrick.
All right, let me take this off of full share. Anyway, welcome to the first 2020 edition of Try This at Work. Today, we're going to join a couple of things together to make some sense of whiteboarding, and not just digital whiteboarding. I know the title says digital whiteboarding, but I guess everything on a computer is digital to a degree. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a couple of ways we can whiteboard within Teams, as well as share content in whiteboarding, in a couple of different ways, right? So first of all, within Teams itself, there is a whiteboard function, right? So let's jump into what that looks like, right? So let me pull up a Teams calendar. Let's go over here. And this is my demo tenant, right? We're just going to do a meet now real quick. And hopefully you can see my screen.
Hey, Patrick, you're still sharing your the deck if you want to flip it to your desktop.
Yeah, flip it. Let's flip it to the desktop here.
Done.
Let's share screen 2. How about that? There we go. All right, so I'm sharing, this is on my demo tenant here, and we're just gonna join now real quick, right? Just a simple meeting. And what we're gonna do is, let me take the sound off, hopefully you can still hear me. And if you go to share, right, you can go to share, there's a kind of a simple view of the whiteboard application built into Teams. So if you go there, you can then share that whiteboard within the team meeting itself. Right, it's kind of, but it's simplified, right? There's not as many pens or colors when it comes to this sharing application. And you can see that obviously this is just going to be my mouse, but if you had a stylus or a touchpad or an iPad or something like that, you could do it that way too. One of the things that you can do here is you can web share this link to other participants, and then they can co-author with you during this whiteboard in this team session. So a couple of things that you can do here is just share this within the meeting, but a couple of things that you can't do is share this with other people external to this account. So within this meeting itself, anybody that's joined this meeting will be able to see and co-author on this whiteboard, but you just can't invite other people to this meeting. And that's kind of the down factor here. Again, it's very simple. It's a simplified version. There's not as many choices as well, right? So you can see if you use the whiteboard application, and we're going to use that next, that none of that stuff, all of the like ink to shape and ink to table and snap grids, none of that stuff's in this version. And honestly, I do not know if it's getting expanded by any means. But that's a simple way to do whiteboarding within Teams itself, right? So real quick. And then what you can do next is the whiteboard application overall. And let's pull that one over here. Look at that, Kelly's already loved Teams. What you can do in this one, right, is now you have the ability to really expand this audience, because sometimes when you can't invite somebody from the outside, so if you look, I've already invited Kelly. So if you go to the directory, all these people are Microsoft people, right? I couldn't invite somebody from Coca-Cola or Pepsi or something like that because they're not in my directory. So what I typically do is in a Teams meeting, if I want an expanded version of the whiteboard, I actually then will start up the whiteboard here, right? And then share that screen. I use it, this is the second screen that I have. And that way we can then co-author on it together with internal people, but everybody external to the meeting can actually see and consume that content. Kelly's in here and she's already written this. If she was going to write something on the whiteboard itself, I can actually see where she's co-authoring as well. It'll actually have a little icon like that. See that Kelly is actually drawing on this whiteboard. And we could have as many participants. I believe that the participant list is 99 that can co-author at the same time. Not that you're going to ever have have anybody co-author that many times, but you could, right? And that's kind of the beauty of it. And then what happens on this whiteboard application is that you can then put this whiteboard application on any device, right? So for example, this is the same whiteboard application that's on a Surface Hub, right? And you have the ability to co-author and collaborate that way. A couple of more things that are on here, right, is that now we have the ability to do a couple of other things. So I just have a mouse. I don't have a stylus on my desktop. My Surface is in the garage, so I just going to use this. But what couple of things we can do ink to shape. And if you haven't seen ink to shape, it's really cool, right? So I actually have the ability to draw kind of like a bad circle, but watch what happens, right? It'll actually create a circle, perfect circle for me. And we can do that with squares, right, and triangles. That's actually a bad triangle. But so you can see how this can kind of create a better environment for you. And if you want a perfect circle, then you can do that way. A couple of things too is if you don't like the circle you drew right here, right, you can actually go ahead and erase that, because this is what we do with drawing. And watch what happens when I try to erase an ink to shape, right? That shape is not drawn on there. It was created. I can't actually erase it. So that way, when I'm coloring stuff in, right, like this, I do this a lot, right? I can then erase that without erasing my shape. Kind of a cool little feature. But if you do want to erase it, you can just right click on it and then erase it and then delete it from there, right? So really cool stuff. What else is on here? Oh, this ink to table. This is another cool one. So if you're doing a lot of grids and stuff like that, you could do ink to table. And so if you do this and it'll create a table for you. Now you can start expanding that table if you want to with all the other stuff. So some quick way to create a table, and then you can write within that. Another thing that you can do is object snapping, is just snapping those objects together so it gets close. I don't actually use it a lot, but it works. What else? This is a cool one too, is this the ability to export this. So now that you've created this whole meeting, right? So a couple of ways. So maybe you had a Teams meeting and you recorded it, right? And that way you can then save this whiteboard to just a whiteboard application, and then you can go back there and change it later. But you can also export it as like an SVG file, right? So if it's a high quality file, so you have it's a vector file is really what it stands for, right? And then you can also do PNG. Look at that. Kelly's putting in shapes and stuff and pictures and stuff like that. So you can also do that when you export it that way. You can also post to Teams. So if you have this whiteboard available, you can then post it to the teams that you work in. So something really cool that you can do it that way. Any questions? No one's in the ground. All right. My dog's there. So I apologize if he barks without prompting. A couple of other things that you can do is we want to clear this canvas. Kelly actually pulled in a whole bunch of pictures, right? So you can actually import pictures that way. You can go to a catalog and import them there, or you can just do them right from the website. You can do a Bing catalog. You can do local catalogs. You can do a whole bunch of different stuff, right? What else is on here? I don't really care about toolbar location. So here's another cool thing to do, right? Is you can also, like I said, this is kind of an agnostic program. You can put this on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share my screen on my, there we go, stop mirroring. We're going to stop it and we're going to start it again. We're going to mirror my iPhone here. Just Lonely Screen just died on me. So Lonely Screen is the application that I use to share my phone. So if you ever need to share your phone within a meeting, I use Lonely Screen. And now look what happens is actually I have a whiteboard application on the from iOS store, right? So you just go to the App Store and look what happens. I'm already actually in this meeting, right? So you can see all the stuff that we have co-authored. I'm actually going to co-author it from my phone, right? So now I can show you how we can draw on this screen, and I'll draw it over here, right? Let me move my mouse over here, and that way you can see that whatever I'm drawing on my screen on my iPhone actually happens right in the whiteboard itself. So again, co-authoring from any device, it's completely agnostic of what platform you're going to use. This works on iPad, this works on Android, I use it on my Apple, my Mac as well. So super cool stuff. All right, so that's two different whiteboards. One whiteboard, that simplified digital whiteboard within the Teams meeting itself. This is the whiteboard application that you can have during the Teams meeting itself as well. And then finally, let's go to on-demand. You've seen these. This is Try This at Work. I showcased this a couple of times ago when we had Magic Whiteboard before. So let me refresh that screen. Magic Whiteboard is the ability to use a Microsoft Teams room, right? So Microsoft Teams room, and I'll play this, I'm not going to put the sound on, but Microsoft Teams rooms has the ability to have what we call a content camera. So we obviously have a regular participant camera, right, that shows the screen, and who's that goofball on the screen, that shows the participants in the conferencing room. But then we actually have a content camera, and that content camera is one of the 3 certified devices. I happen to use the Logitech Brio for my content camera, but Crestron makes one too, and I can't remember the third partner that makes one. I'll put that in a note somewhere for you guys. And what happens is that content camera then uses AI to determine the screen that you're going to be presenting on. As you can see, I actually have a physical whiteboard in my office. This looks a little bit different than my last office, but you get the point, right? And that what happens is that content camera then uses AI to determine the whiteboard space. And then when you draw on the screen with your dry erase marker, AI determines what that black ink is. And you can see when I draw, it's kind of gray, right? And until that screen gets digitized, then it turns black, and then I can walk in front of it. That way everybody that's consuming that data doesn't have to see me in front of it. They actually just see the digital ink and stuff. So that's a cool way to do it as well. What else do we got? Lastly, oh, here's a cool thing, right? So within Teams itself, let me pull up a calendar here, and I'm just gonna there's a community call. Hopefully there's nothing on here that I can't show. Let me look here. Is that once you have a meeting a meeting scheduled in Teams, here, there we go. Right, here's one. So once you create a meeting in Teams, right, there's that meeting life cycle. So we have a pre-meeting life cycle, we have a during meeting life cycle, then we have a post-meeting life cycle. So what that means is when you create that meeting in Teams and then obviously send it out to everybody on your participation list, you have all these things created for you before the meeting even starts. And what that allows you to do is collaborate before the meeting. So in the old days, kind of, and this is kind of getting on a tangent, but you know, I talk a lot. So in the old days of the Skype world and the WebEx world and the Zoom world, right, you have that pre-contained meeting that from 9 to 10, you're going to talk about X, right? And then if you have questions afterwards, you're going to have to send an email, right? Or you're going to have another meeting talking about the questions that you have. But what if you can keep the same meeting going kind of in a persistent fashion? So you can obviously have a chat type of scenario where you can actually have a pre-meeting dialogue, right? What if you have meeting information such as PowerPoint slides or Excel spreadsheets that you want to distribute to the team? Obviously in the past, you just sent everybody an email. But what if you could just post those files right into the team meeting itself, and then they're persistent? That way people before the meeting can actually go in there, review the data, look at the agenda, maybe even make or modify those files. And then after the meeting, should you have questions, you can continue that conversation in the chat portion and then still go back into those persistent files and make and modify them as you see fit. That's a long-winded way to say that every channel, every meeting that you create also has a whiteboard. And look at that, right? I could actually have a whiteboard in the meeting, before the meeting, and after the meeting that's still persistent with this meeting itself. So that way, and you can see this is the simplified Teams whiteboard. It's not the expanded application whiteboard. That way, everybody that's invited to this team, I was going to draw a motorcycle, but I really suck at drawing. So this is my motorcycle, right? That looks like a Tron motorcycle. But that allows you to be able to collaborate in many different immersive ways throughout the meeting. So it's a much more collaborative and immersive effect for those meetings. They're not just a static, they're dynamic. They can always change, right? And on that note, I always take meeting notes in my meeting notes section. Again, why? So everybody can take notes at the same time. Everybody can see those notes and you can share those notes. You don't have to send a different file or a Word document or anything like that. I know this is not a lot of content. I actually didn't expect to go to 12:30. Kelly, is there anything that I'm missing that we need to talk about? Is there any questions at all from the crowd?
Yeah, there actually was. So a couple things here. Someone was asking from the whiteboard that we were showing previously, from the whiteboard app, can you cut and paste into the whiteboard? And it's a good, that's a really good question. So just let everybody know, yes, you can. The other question that came across specifically for you, Patrick, is we have someone that is wanting to see how you actually enable the content camera in the meeting.
Oh, okay. So, well, I can't really show it, right? Because my camera's not on. But here, I can walk you through it, right? And what I need to do is probably join from you know what? Hold on. Here's how I can show it. Watch this. We're going to go lonely screen, and we're going to do my camera. Check this out. All right. So that way you'll be able to see it. Will that work? Holy cow, look at that.
Yes, that's perfect.
That's Bernard, by the way, everybody. So inside a meeting, right? So once you have a new meeting, you're actually going to have settings in here, right? So by the way, my password's SFB in case you break into my house and you want to log into my console. SFB. That's the default password for MTR, right? So in FFB, you're going to have a couple of settings, right? So let's go to devices and peripherals. And in here, right, when you have multiple cameras hooked up to the device, you're actually going to have a choice between what camera you want to use for the content camera. You can see the content camera is right here. What happens is you enable that content camera, and then it'll actually have a preview, right? So here's how it works. The content camera, I'm getting the call at the same time. So that content camera obviously is pointed at my digitized whiteboard, right? And good gosh. What that does is then it makes that AI, makes that into a screen. So that way when I write on it, it's more digitized, right? I actually don't have a meeting here today. I guess I could create one on the fly, but what happens is then when you are presenting in a meeting, you're going to have a screen that says content camera. You just hit a button. That probably doesn't answer the question, but that's as good as I can probably do live right now.
No, that's good, Patrick. We have a couple more questions. Hopefully that helps. And again, we're more than happy to answer any questions post-event that anyone has, both Patrick and myself. Patrick.kelly@microsoft.com and kelly.cleland@microsoft.com. Feel free to message us with your questions. Again, more than happy to help you. Somebody's asking, can you use multiple whiteboards per meeting?
Well, I mean, kind of, right? So this whiteboard is logged into my Patrick Kelly account, right? So you could actually have you can clear this canvas and start again. That's one way to do multiple whiteboards. You can save this to a team and then post another whiteboard. You can actually run this application itself with another user account. So if I had a demo user account or a demo tenant, which I do, you could then run that application through that as well.
Perfect. Another question. With a digital ink using the Logitech camera, can users who aren't in the room add to the drawing, or does the camera only incorporate the digitized expo marker?
Fantastic question, right? So that is a one-way whiteboard, just like a physical whiteboard in any given room that you're sharing through Teams or through a camera. It's not a co-authoring whiteboard, right? So participants in the meeting will only be able to consume that data. That's a great ask. I don't know if we're working on that. It would be very hard, right, to do that, but I haven't seen a roadmap for that item, but that's super cool, right? So when I need to co-author or collaborate immersively with my group, that's when I'll fire up the digital whiteboard, right? And you can do that from any Teams meeting, obviously from any Surface Hub or Surface Pro or desktop. That's what I use for the collaboration part. But great question.
Yeah, another really great one is there a way to split the screen in Teams to have the notes for one meeting and the whiteboard for the same meeting open simultaneously?
Another great question, right? So one of the roadmaps is to pop out a meeting, right? So like today at Ignite, we announced that pop out chat is coming, right? Microsoft already has it. Our dog food already has it. You can pop out a chat from an individual into an individual application or window from the chat section of Teams itself. In the future, same thing's going to happen with meetings, right? So you'll be able to actually pop out that meeting portion into another window and then share a whiteboard within the Teams channel as well, or share the application. You can split the screen that way. So that way you can snap it, you know how you snap it in Windows to one side or the other. You'll be able to do that soon. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're wanting, but you kind of can do it that way.
Great. Another question is, and I actually don't know the answer to this one. Let's see if you know, when is the Mac app for Whiteboard coming?
The Mac app for Whiteboard. So the Whiteboard app within Teams works, right, with on a Mac, because I just did it. The iOS version is on there as well. You know what, I don't, I could find out real quick, but I don't know if there, I would think that there was one already out there. I do not know the answer to that. So I'll find out and certainly answer that later on.
Okay, perfect. And then another question, when does whiteboarding come native to the MTR?
Well, so it's the content whiteboard is already there, right? So a built-in whiteboard, that's not really a use case that I know of, right? So what we can do is on an MTR, you can have a second monitor, right? So that second monitor can be your whiteboard. You could have a stylus connected to it or a touch screen. I have two monitors for presentation purposes because one monitor is for collaboration and the other monitor is for presentation mode. But you can do a second monitor like that and use it that way.
Perfect. And then another question. Does one meeting participant have permissions to erase whiteboard content that another participant has made? In other words, I can only edit my own additions to the whiteboard.
Yeah, so when you have multiple people, right, you're going to export that whiteboard. That file is yours, right? You can certainly own it however you want to. Once you export it into, like, say, an SVG file, then everybody that will have access to that file that you're going to control permissions on that. So if you want to export it to a team, like, only people in that team will have the ability to edit that whiteboard. These are your whiteboards, right? I've actually invited Kelly, or I can invite anybody, but I own these. These are actually in my whiteboard container. I think I put these in OneDrive.
Yeah, and just related to content, to continue to answer that question. So, right, Patrick gave me permission to that whiteboard, right? So I have edit permissions to that. So you could see there for a brief second, if it popped up on your screen, that you saw me delete his table that he added earlier.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, anything else?
So everything's permission space. Yes. If you have reoccurring meetings, could you see the notes from the previous meetings?
100%. Yeah, those meeting notes, right, are persistent. So what you do is when we have reoccurring meetings, I will date that in the meeting notes and then continue on with that meeting. So I could see the use case there is that if we want to have a meeting note for every single meeting, you might want to, in that case, for a recurring meeting, I would actually put a OneNote tab on my team, right? So that way we have a OneNote section, we can section it off, because the meeting note section within the meeting itself is not tabbed. It's just one continuous document. So OneNotes within, you could tab the meeting is probably a better use case scenario there.
Yeah, and one person is actually asking about devices. So is there a pen device that we can attach? Now, clearly, I didn't use a pen on my side. I was just drawing with my finger. I have a pen, a Surface pen. But do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually this active pen right here, right? I'm just drawing with my mouse, right? So what would happen if I had a touch screen or an iPad or in my Surface, right? That's a touch screen. That active pen then could be used by touching the screen, obviously, or any sort of stylus that you have. I have a Surface stylus that I use. When I whiteboard, I actually whiteboard on that a little bit better than I can draw with my mouse. So absolutely, you could use a pen device for that. You just have to make the active pen toggle switch on.
Perfect. And then can you also show, someone was asking about the export feature. Can you also show the different types of file types for export?
Yeah, it's PNG and SVG, right? So PNG is just a picture. What we have here is an SVG, so that's more of a vector, right? So sometimes people like to use vectors for, well, a lot of times I'll use it. You can import that into a vector program. So not that you need to get too crazy, but you can actually make those pictures a vector, and then you can do like 3D modeling or CAD drawing with SVG files.
Perfect. Thank you. And looks like last question for you, Patrick, from the group. Really active audience. We really appreciate these questions. They do help everyone else. Someone is saying if you could please recap how you access the whiteboard to begin with in the very beginning of the meeting. They just want to make sure that they understand where they go to get that whiteboard.
So I don't necessarily understand that question. How did I start the? Oh,
how did you access your whiteboard?
Gotcha. Just before I answer that question, I made. If you guys saw my LinkedIn post, I did a LinkedIn post about Skype to Teams many moons ago. I think it was November, right? I actually whiteboarded that into a SVG file, and now then you can now import that into. For example, this is Inkscape, right? It's a vector program that I can use, and that way you can then make this a 3D model or a CAD drawing, because all these vectors that can be distinguished and moved around. So that's what I use SVGs for. Okay, finally, let's go back to Teams. Boom, 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 and let's make that available. And so in Teams, right, we started this meeting, this live event, right? What you can do is when you hit share. I can't. Well, you know what? I can't do it now because I did it in the test tenant. Let's go here, right? So and we'll start it again, right? We'll start this meeting again. Hang up. So let's start a new meeting, right? So dismiss, blah blah. And so we're gonna go. I just go to calendar. I'll just do the meet now real quick, right? So meet now. So anytime you join a meeting, it's going to look like this, right? This is your pre-meeting activity. So when I join the meeting, what happens is that when I go to share content, I'm obviously the only one in the meeting, but when I go to share content, right, the whiteboard's on the right side. So Freehand is another whiteboard. Actually, it's an app. Obviously, we're an apps and bot-driven partnership with third-party vendors. So Freehand by InVision is one of the first applications that was created for Teams that did whiteboarding. And this is the native Microsoft whiteboard app that comes within Teams. So I just go to share that, and then boom, it loads that simplified whiteboard up within the team itself in the meeting. And then everybody in the meeting can then collaborate on that same whiteboard. So that's how I did it.
Perfect. Thank you. I believe we have addressed all the questions, unless anyone wants to take a moment to submit one right now. Aside for that, we're about 3 minutes out from the conclusion of our meeting. So it looks like nothing's coming through, Patrick. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap this up. We thank everybody for their time today. Again, just as a reminder, if you want to go to the Try This at Work website, the archive recording of this meeting will be posted along with all of the other past Try This at Work Teams in 30 sessions. And we look forward to hosting you for our next event, again, which is also posted on that site under live events. And we'll actually be talking about live events.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kelly.
Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. And we hope you have a great day. And thank you again, Patrick.
You're welcome.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.